good afternoon, everyone. And first, I'd like to thank General Rome for inviting me to this seminar. This is my first trip to Israel, and I very much appreciate it and enjoy it, even though it's a short one. I was given a challenge. The first one is it's the first presentation after the lunch. So it's always a challenge to make sure that you will not fall asleep. But I have a even bigger challenge, which is I was asked to provide the manufacturer perspective on how to ensure aviation us what's going to take place in 20 minutes from now. As we have seen, the air transport is a very dynamic, complex system with huge variability. Dynamic, we have just seen it. With the past at which things are changing. Complex, complex because we are a system in which there are multiple number of actors, and they are all interface together. Huge variability. The aviation in Israel is not the same than in Europe, is not the same than in Southeast Asia. It's everywhere the same. Big differences, big variability. So the question is, what can be the global safety perspective in such a very dynamic environment? And what can be the possible way forward? To address this, I'd like first we spend a bit of time on accident statistics over a long period of times because it gives us the background on which we have built all together the aviation history. So this chart gives you the fatal accident rate per million departures versus each active years. And it's split in 4 different categories of airplanes according to the level of technology on board. So it goes from the first gen in green airplanes like 707, like Caravel. The second one, airplanes where you have better integration of auto-throttle system and autopilot, for example. So airplanes like the first Airbus A300 before, or DC 10 747 classic. The third one is the glass cockpit with FMS and nav display. And the fourth gen, it's all these airplanes which have a flight envelope protection. So it's all the free-twinning and onward for Airbus family, and it also includes the 777 and the 787. So very clearly lessons learned from this evolution over the years. Very quickly, I would put aside the learning curve, because when you have a limited number of data, from a statistical viewpoint, it's not really meaningful. I prefer we focus on the long-term perspective, when we have huge data and typically the fourth generation is in its 25 years of operation already. So it starts to be in bracket an old type of things, but it is the latest. So it gives you an idea of the number of experience we have. And basically, the fourth generation is currently with the 320, 30, 40, 80, and the 777. It's about 8,000 airplanes in service. So it's a huge experience. So what have we learned? Switching from the first generation to the three overs, we have probably done in brackets the easiest. By the easiest, I mean to improve the machine. To improve the reliability of the airframe of the system of the engine. Now switching from the second to the third and fourth. The big driver was clearly the improvement of the performance of the navigation. And the major driver to move from the third to the fourth is clearly the flight envelope protection, addressing the loss of control type of events. So the big question is now, if we look to the airplanes which are still manufactured, so the third and the fourth generation of airplanes, the big question is, what can we achieve to give her to further win the factor 10, to further reduce this accident rate. There are some major challenges. There are a number of them. I've put them in three categories. The first one is the holistic nature of the air transport. The second one is the variability of operational context. And the last one is the dynamic nature and its uncertainty. So let's first review the major risks. Okay, about high professional standards. Let's go back to the accident statistics. This is exactly the same traces, but shown in a different manner in order to try to compare by the time of experience of each of them. And as I explained earlier, clearly we have improved a lot. Not only about the machine, but also the global environment. And there are quite a number of lessons learned. The first one that comes to mind is clearly about the automation. We all know that each time we put automation somewhere in a given industry, what some debates. But the facts are there. And as I mentioned earlier, with the latest generation of airplanes, we have 25 years of experience, more than 8,000 airplanes in service. More than 80 million flight cycles and close to 200 million flight hours. With more than 350 airlines around the world. So in terms of what the facts are telling us, it's quite strong. So yes, the automation has brought safety benefits, and it will continue. Just to give you an example, or going back to what I said earlier, I mentioned one of the big improvements from the second to the third and the fourth was the navigation performance. The tools, GPS, and this was clearly one of the key elements to further reduce the CFIT type of accident. When you switch now to the third, from the third to the fourth, and when you look to the detailed data, accident rates on the last generation of airplanes is 2 times lower than the third. And the big driver is the flight envelope protection with a loss of control. So this morning we heard about a prospective from ICAO about the three main categories of accidents: CFIT, loss of control, and runway excursion. So with this background of automation, we are motivated to continue, and I'm sure that some of you are already aware that we have developed a system which is called the ROPS, Runway Protection System, which is energy-based, performance-based system, which provides an assistance to crew in real time for the go-around decision-making process. In terms of, can I make it strongly believe in proper control automation to bring safety benefits. The second one, which is very important, sharing of information is vital. And this morning we heard discussion about legal framework which can be obstacle to sharing of information. Yes, everywhere in a lot of countries, legal framework are potential obstacles. But we cannot fix what we do not know. And we cannot help the others by sharing the experience. So if there is certainly one key common value that we have all in common, this is this one. As I mentioned earlier, keeping the highest train standard is one of the key. There is no doubt about it. Why? Because even if you take the most modern airplanes, if you don't have the right training standard, sooner or later you won't get a positive outcome. But the same is all type of airplanes. And we have a very good example where having very high training standards helps saving the day. As I mentioned, air transport is a dynamic, complex system with huge variability. And talking about higher training standard, I mean not only the pilot, but at all levels of the air transport system. It's true for authorities. It is true for the aircraft manufacturers, for the operators, for the air traffic controllers. It's true for the management. It's true for mechanics, for pilots, for designers, for everyone. And having high professional standard is really one of the key elements that will probably help us to continue facing such dynamic evolution of the air transport system. I just want to focus on one example because it's the one which is most often discussed. It's about pilot. If we think about the evolution of the pilot job, average time spent flying manually the airplane is not more than what? 5 minutes. So imagine at the end of the year, the amount of hands-on flying experience it gets. Evolution of pilot background. It has changed very significantly. Surveys were done in the past by interviewing kids or teenagers 30 years ago. What do you dream? What do you want to do out of your future? And among the first replies, you've got replies such as, I want to go to the moon. I want to be a fighter pilot. Test pilot. Same survey done nowadays. I want to be a soccer player. Hollywood actors. These are really the one thing that today kids are dreaming about. So it gives an idea of the evolution of the background. The way also kids are grown up today is totally different than 30 years ago. hangar flying type of discussions going through the magazine to learn more, which was not the case in the past. Having said this, the demand for new pilot is huge. Is huge. The traffic growth is there. What are the solutions? I'm not sure there is any magic solutions, but just to share with you some ideas. Evidence-based training. Just to give you an example, when you look to the today of failure of engines compared to very first jet, it's days and nights. So the probability to have on today's jet an engine failure at V1 is extremely remote. Compared to what it could have been 20 years, 30 years ago. But the probability to have a ground to be performed full thrust, all engines operative, is there. So it is what it's about much more operational scenario, which are much more valid with the current environment in which we are. Typically, high energy ground full thrust on all engines. Learning from positive. When we are on the field of safety, we spend a lot to say most of the time discussing about what went wrong during major incident or accident. Which indeed is very important from lessons learned from safety events. But what about from a training perspective, also spending as many time with pilots, sharing why on very few days, very few events which were extremely challenging. Why the crew were on board these events have been able to save the day. And I'm convinced that there is a significant safety benefit. I just want to mention quickly uh, uh, three events. The first one I have in Dad. It was a cargo freighter airplanes, and they have been shut down by a manpad, leading to the loss of the free hydraulics and a massive fuel leak on the left engine with big fires. Only the engines to bring back the airplane. Why is it so that they made it? Lessons learned. They focused on the essential. Was really a matter of, in brackets, stick and rudder, because stick and rudder were not working anymore, but it was really airmanship, focus on the essential. They made it. QA32, you learn about it. Contain failure on the free it's about team being capable of teamwork. And the last one I have in mind is that Sun River, this emergency landing on the Sun in New York. It's to focus on the right decision, which was to make the Sun and not to go back to La Guardia. So these are some type of events which fortunately have very few, but for which I am definitely convinced that by sharing those a 350 on the bottom right, as you were training through flying a 727 or an F300 before years ago. It's not at all the same environment. And here again, I think there is space for improvement on the training side to make sure that the training is evolving as quickly as the technology is evolving. Taking safety for granted. Looking to the figures with the latest generation of airplanes for the last 10 years of operation, the statistics shows that we have one fatal accident per 10 million departures. So a lot of could consider is a deal. One per 10 million. This will never happen to me. So here there is a threat, particularly when you consider the overall context, the risk exposure in which we are. In the free domains, safety being the combination of course of safe airplane, safe operations, and safe overall environment. And this risk exposure is particularly true when you consider the global here again, I don't offer any magic solution, just food for thought, for food, sorry. But safety awareness, developing the right safety culture, and SMS is probably one of the means, not simply by taking the box, the box to show that we are SMS compliant, but by really developing a true safety culture with each and every one of our own organization. Changes free of them, the holistic nature of air transport. As you know, there have been a number of safety initiatives which have been launched over the years by individual actors. I mentioned the flight envelope protection, terrain avoidance system. I mentioned the ropes, the short-term conflict alerts, but all these initiatives came from individual organizations. RNP deployment, it's collaborative effort between the manufacturers, the ATC, the airlines, regional aviation groups. I strongly believe, and I'm glad to see that ICAO strongly support that as well with all the program ICAO has launched about the regional efforts, like the program in the States, or the Latin American group, the America, which is working quite effectively. It's one of the best means to address the regional threat, to share the experience locally, and to address collectively the issues that need to be fixed. understood seems obvious. But I wish sure that it's implemented everywhere to re-emphasize, to repeat the lessons learned. Robust flight data monitoring implementation. Promote sharing of information. All are important lessons learned, which are implemented in a number of places in the world, within a number of aviation actors, but not everywhere. So clearly, we need ad hoc approaches. With the capability to focus on the right things to do first, to grab the low-hanging fruits, I'm convinced that by applying this in a number of places, each and every one of its fruits will not bring by itself a big safety benefit, but the combination of them, yes. and this is what we do. And we anticipate about what we know and what we can forecast from what we know. But yet we are in a situation, in an environment where there will always be unprecedented and unanticipated situations. We are full of uncertainty ahead of us. And clearly the challenge is to be able together to build, to switch from a priori type of responses to resilience. Think about 9/11. Think about the volcano in Europe. And all the consequences about it. Things about Fukushima. And I'm really convinced that one of the key elements that will help us to have a robust resilience type of approach it's an even stronger organized aviation system with the highest professional standards, which are the key elements